I'd like to welcome you to the next edition of the AIQRATE Web Specials, the CXO series. Today we have with us Dr. Vishal Talwar, the Dean School of Management, BML Munjal University. And he'll be talking about experiential learning, the next paradigm in education. The session will be moderated by Dhanrajani, the CEO and co-founder of AIQRATE Advisory and Consulting. Before we start, I'd like to take you through a few housekeeping rules. I request all of you all to stay on mute so that everybody has a good listening and speaking experience. We'll also be taking questions, which we will answer towards the end of the session. You can put your questions in the Q&A or the chat panel that you have in WebEx. I will relay them to Samir. Questions not answered, we'll take up later after the session, offline. I'd like to start by introducing Dr. Vishal Talwar. He is the Dean, School of Management, BML Munjal University. Prior to joining BMU, Dr. Talwar was the head of campus, Mumbai, and Assistant Dean at the SP Jain School of Global Management, Dubai, Mumbai, Singapore. Spent close to 12 years in the United Kingdom and returned to India in 2013 as Dean, JRE School of Management, and Educomp Raffles joint venture. Whilst in the UK, Dr. Talwar worked as faculty in leading universities such as the London School of Economics and Henley Business School, University of Reading. At Henley, he was awarded the Outstanding Contribution to Learning and Teaching Award in recognition of his consistent endeavor to improve the student experience. Dr. Talwar is a PhD from the Manchester Business School, where he was awarded a doctoral scholarship by the Shell Oil Company. With a first degree in mechanical engineering and a post-graduation in management, Dr. Talwar has previously worked in the automotive as well as advertising industries in firms such as Exide Industries and Euro RSCG Advertising. I'd like to welcome you, Dr. Talwar. Thank you so much for joining us. To carry on.
Thanks very much, Rohan. It's an absolute pleasure to be here on this particular webinar today. I look forward to an amazing engagement and interaction with everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Rohan, and thanks, Vishal. It's a pleasure to have you at the webinar session. And you and me know each other for last couple of years, and must say, I think the thought process you bring to the table is immense in terms of what I say, a blend of industry and academic, which is something I call it rare, but very kind of, let's significant in today's time. Can I just have everyone go on mute, please? It's disturbing the flow of the conversations. Okay, great. Thanks. So I think, Vishal, we have a range of kind of, let's say, themes to cover, but predominantly, I think learning has gone through a change, a significant change on this. But before I dwell on that, I think the genesis, which I want to pick up your views, is all about in the last few years of this change, as we call it, the VUCA side. A lot of industries have gone through a major transformation. Value chains of the businesses have changed. And so is the expectation when it comes to the talent, the leadership, and also in terms of how they should perform at the workplace. Now, academic institutions cannot be insulated from this, because at the end of the day, I think they are the ones who are actually giving a large supply, and it's a big talent pool which is coming from there. Just want to pick up your brains in terms of some of these strategic considerations as you see, which have changed in terms of industry changes, and how do you think academia has been able to align or not really aligned on some of those aspects, in your opinion, please?
So obviously for the academic sector, there's a lot of change, and of course, the change is a constant even in our case. So I think whether we look at it from a rising expectation perspective, whether we look at it from this whole idea of the competitive nature of the job market, whether it is about the rising cost of education by itself. So I think a lot of these things around the fact that education by itself has become quite dear, with the advent of various courses, with the advent of various universities, higher educational institutions. So that's also a very dynamic thing that we'll have to look at. There's always an expectation of being a very agile university, which is predominantly looking at how to enhance the employability as well as the placeability of applicants, of students. That's because fundamentally speaking, most universities in India, in fact, all universities in India, are very much positioned on this whole plank of job placement, or this whole plank of job consumption. I'm not saying job placement, but this whole idea of creating talent, which essentially or predominantly 95%, 98% of the time going into job markets, right? It's only now in the last few years wherein there's been a bit of a change and this whole transition in a country where there's a rising self-employment for various reasons, right? Or this whole idea of entrepreneurship that the ecosystem is bringing in. So that's a dynamic change as well. So this, these are things which universities, higher education institutions have to deal with. We've been talking about the entrepreneurial ecosystem, but the fact is that most of us were predominantly going rather slow in comparison. But with this particular crisis, this will actually get speeded up. Now, is that because of the quantum of particular roles coming down, or whether it is this whole idea of this being looked at as an opportunity by people who are happy to take risks? That's something that universities have to address. Of course, the universities are also going to address the technological disruption knocking at its doors for a long time. So technology and digital innovation is obviously the norm. From a career point of view, that's something that higher education institutions will have to be able to look at, even from a learning experience point of view. Why do we keep talking about the fact that management programs and tech programs are, a bit of a fusion course, if I can call it that?
Mm-hmm.
That's because at the end of the day, if you're preparing, students for careers for the next 40 years, we can't run away from the fact that, the management programs, for example, will have a very different look going forward. Whether you call it the blend of tech plus management plus some levels of liberal orientations, a lot of these are actual changes that are affecting us. The other thing that I believe is something that is very dynamic is this whole idea of operating in a global context. We always want to operate in a global context. We always want to evolve to, let's say, a QS World Rankings instead of just a QS BRICS rankings or whatever. But the fact is, a lot of changes need to be done there to be able to achieve really high levels of evolution over there. So that's on the mind as well. How do you get the best practices from different parts? How do you ensure you get international accreditations? The learning deliveries, that's something which we could also possibly look at. How do you retain the best talent? How do you inculcate certain qualities in the faculty? All those are things that universities, higher education institutions, colleges, everyone's trying to understand and trying to work with. Even the relevance of the curriculum, all those things are all aspects which is being the lot of things that anybody at certain levels at the university will have to keep thinking about, and that's most Indian universities, especially the progressive universities, are on a daily basis trying to understand what's the strategic plan, how does the change actually have an effect on us in the longer term. There are certain other about will there be more universities or will there be less universities? Will education get atomized across for-profit, not-for-profit institutions? A lot of these thoughts obviously are in the minds and of course at the same time on the drawing boards of many different higher education institutions.
Great. So I'll pick up what you said towards the latter part of your narrative, which is this atomization of education, and I'll come to that. If I see what you really said, and you've touched a very broad brush in terms of these key, what I would say the challenges, issues, and also in terms of those strategic alignment, and you rightly said it's a whole spectrum. If I just take a bit further before I talk about the whole learning aspect, there is also one more facet about this future of work. Uh, as you rightly said, management, education, engineering kind of, let's say, programs, it's more tilted towards the whole aspect of today, what we consume in terms of maybe the managerial kind of positions or the technical geeks kind of, let's say, roles for the engineering. Now, certainly, we have VUCA world where we have gig workers. You rightly said about entrepreneurship. A lot of entrepreneurs, students are turning entrepreneurs right from straight out of the college. Then we have aspect about PVC firms consuming a lot of this talent, and even the startups, the deep tech startups. Now, this was never anticipated a few years back. So, what's in your view the education in terms of really aligning strategically should be thinking, and I'm sure you know this thing more than anyone else, it's not just about learning. There's a whole array. So just want to take your views, Vishal, on this before we dwell on the main theme.
Well, yes, I think the future of work has already arrived. Now, it could be because of various reasons. It could be because of the automation, the big data space. It's about the, biochemistry. It's about the Internet of Things. I think this is already very much prevalent. At the same time, will only get speeded up because of the kind of crisis we are currently witnessing. Some people say that it'll take about 3 months. Some people say it's going to take longer in getting back to normal. We don't know what is normal, right? But the fact is that the future of work is definitely getting disrupted from the tech perspective. Future of work is definitely getting disrupted from a perspective of wanting business leaders or corporate leaders who are able to manage in those environments at a later date. All of us, frankly, we don't know what is the exact space we will see in a few years' time. We can guess. Some people guess better than others. But the fact is, some things are clear. If I look at what, let's say, Ernst & Young says in terms of exponential technologies, they talk about the launch of smart connected products, services, which is already happening, the creation of highly optimized supply chains, certain business innovations that are already there, the aggregator, markets. Sustainability is a big question. Sustainability in the right manner. It's not about a lip service sustainability, but the fact is, how do you balance, the planet as well as the need to sustain profits? These factors will become, big questions that business leaders will have to answer going forward. One more thing that we're seeing now is new work arrangements, right? So if you look at how people are working right now, and you keep hearing comments that, oh, look, actually productivity has gone up, right? At least from that sense. I'm not saying that everybody's productivity has gone up. Let's look at a certain kind of population that is working from home. So whether it's CEOs, whether it's people at the middle level, everybody is tending to work from home. So you would definitely see a lot of movement of high caliber work or high level work or high skilled work that will work from remote locations, right? Like home. And that kind of will become a norm, because you will realize that, look, the fact is profitability is required. The fact is that it costs me less. The fact is that I don't necessarily need to spend so much on, office spaces or, big locations where I have 3,000 square feet of space. It's, these are things which may have not mattered, even a few months back. But the fact is that it might matter going forward. How do we plan for that? That requires a very different kind of leadership as well. How do you manage people you may not have come across, may not have seen? You're actually inducting them online, and that's what we're doing currently. As a university, we are inducting faculty online. So these people have not been able to come in from whichever locations, from Chennai or where else, and we're actually doing that. And that will kind of become the norm. So this has been happening for a while. You will definitely see roles which are very different. Are we preparing them for that? Even within marketing, even with the field that I belong to as a marketing academic, you might have people who are neuro A/B testers. People who are looking at brain image data, trying to figure out emotions, trying to figure out consumer decision making. You will have people who design personalities for machines, right? Are we actually preparing them for that? The reason why I'm talking about machine personality is because the fact is that we will have to become more comfortable working with machines, because of AI, because of automation. This would obviously become the norm. Automotive industry, right? That industry, are we as universities, academic institutions, are we ready for that as yet? Some of us are still operating in silos. So a mechanical engineering degree or a civil engineering degree is operating in silos. But the fact is that if I'm trying to create, someone who's designing, within the automotive industry, I will want him or her to have a much wider scope of learning than just restricting himself. So sometimes when people say that, the core mechanical engineering jobs are drying up, the fact is that what is core? I think that's something that is up for discussion as well. Right? What is the core now? That obviously has changed a great deal. Medicine.
So Vishal, if I may, you rightly said, what's the core now? Now, the aspect what you blended very beautifully was this future of work with exponential technologies and this whole rebalancing of human-machine equation. You said that we may be working with a cyborg or a humanoid next to us. Now, the course curriculum per se, in that regard, generically speaking, are they really agile, fungible, and really kind of supple in terms of the changing needs of the industries? Or do you believe there's more which could be done just to ensure that when a particular student gets out in the market, he or she is absolutely baked in terms of the right skill sets and competencies?
I think it's a work in progress. It's something that is taking some educational institutions much longer, to realize that we'll have to look at our curriculum quite differently, right? Some people have. Some institutions, some of the progressive institutions have been able to create flexible curriculums. Some of the institutions have been able to create certain levels of cooperation and collaboration within their schools. I think whether it's, let's say the management school and the tech school and the law school and, the design schools, I think it's important that you kind of break those barriers, quite frankly, because the needs are different. You just don't need problem solvers anymore. You need problem identifiers. It's not about critical analysis, but it is also about, are these people well versed in the technologies that the future might throw up over a period of time? Are these people comfortable in ensuring that they learn or they're ready to learn over a period of time? We still have situations wherein we believe that the last 2 years of my education are the last 2 years, and then we'll never ever study again. The fact is that kind of world is gone. Right. So I think the flexibility of the curriculum, the right nature of the courses, this whole combination of bio and mechanical, or this combination of, biology, chemistry, of, marketing plus analytics. I think a lot of this is something that a few institutions are doing better than the others. But this will be the need of the future. Is the course challenging enough? Something that students nowadays, the students also are people who actually question the kind of knowledge that the dissemination might be happening at the moment. Is it going to be relevant? A lot of these things are driving some higher education institutions to actually pioneer a lot of this, curriculum, courses, challenge, gaming, simulation, blended approaches to learning. So I think some universities are actually doing that. I think more universities will start doing that now, especially with this, crisis that we're seeing. Did we want to move online? Well, most of us didn't, but the fact is we did now move online for various reasons. Some moved online much earlier than the others. Some have gradually moved on. I think there'll be more acceptability for a lot of all this. How experiential can you make your curriculum? How are you ensuring that you are reaching the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy to get into that create zone? I think a lot of these things will have to be done before we, prepare the students for the kind of future that some of us are envisaging.
Great. So I want to touch upon now straight away, you rightly said about this experiential learning. It's evolved. MOOCs have been there, as you know, edtech platforms. suddenly we see a bit-sized kind of, let's say, courses available, and the whole aspect of learning has changed. Now, in your view, and this is where I think you may have to elaborate, given the audience we have in terms of who are participating in the session. One, there is a side, an aspect about learning, which is about the course curriculum, the whole set of case studies. And then this aspect is making it much more immersive, interactive kind of a thing, and maybe personalized because it's not one size fits all. What's the whole thing around experiential learning? I mean, from your aspect, and feel free to please provide us the whole secret sauce of BMU. I had a privilege of visiting campus, been through the Center of Excellence, and gone through some of those classes. How it's fantastic over there. What you see, what you've been able to build with the whole team. So just want to understand this whole experiential learning first, in terms of how you see it's evolved. What's the future of experiential learning, and then talking about BMU specifically in terms of what you've been able to do or carry over.
So I think MOOCs and technology-oriented learning or courses online have been around for a while. I think irrespective of whether some progressive universities have existed, but the fact is that for a long period of time, the government, the big institutions from the Ivy League institutions from the West, they've been propagating the benefits of massive online courses. In our opinion, as a part of an institution that the experiential piece is ingrained, into the system, wherein 40, 45, 50% at times of the course curriculum is based on experiential learning. By the way, experiential learning is nothing new. It's how a child learns how to cycle, or how a child learns how to ride a bike, how a child learns how to walk. Right? If you reflect back to that, it's predominantly a do and test loop, right? And it's this whole idea of immersing yourself, trying to do it, getting a feedback loop into place, realizing what mistakes you made the last time around, and of course then improving it, right? So in this process, you're much more engaged with the with the concept. You're much more engaged with the learning piece, and of course the retention is better, right? Because you're doing it by yourself. So if the problem is not that the MOOCs have not existed; they have existed. The issue comes when we essentially treat the MOOCs as another approach to behavioral learning, right? Or some levels of cognitive learning. How do you integrate the MOOCs into the curriculum? How do you ensure that the faculty is doing it the right way? How do you ensure that the faculty is referring to that kind of material? Is also important. You can't leave the student to his or her own devices and tell that person that, look, you can do this course along with this. How do you marry the both? How do you ensure that in a country which is largely oriented around road-based learning, 90%, if you look at, the interventions are largely based on road. How do you ensure that these classes, which are intrinsically valuable, are used in that manner? Right. So I think it's how you treat them, how it gets integrated into the curriculum, how they're actually used. Are you using a constructivist approach to the learning? So in this case, when I talk about, online learning, or when I talk about using MOOCs or, courses maybe from Coursera or otherwise, right? The fact is that the faculty also has to be able to mentor the student through that process. And it's important that we realize that when we are using a blended approach to learning, along with these MOOCs or anything else, or a lot of knowledge that's available online, is it based around constructivism? This whole concept of, look, the learner and the person who is helping in the learning process have to kind of be at the same level and create learning, right? There's, the student himself has to start thinking about this. The facilitator has to make the students realize a few things, but the realization has to be on their own. Right. And then when you have a discussion around the concept or the topic, the fact is that, all those students have to create that sense of peer learning, right? When you have certain thoughts in your mind, when you have certain concepts in your mind, when you apply it in a certain way, when you engage with the others in that conversation is when a lot of self-validation happens. So I think, yes, while we're producing a lot of online content, how we deliver, how we administer, how we integrate that into the curriculum is something that is the biggest challenge, right?
So if I may, just what you rightly said, this whole constructive aspect. But here is the, I won't call it a challenge. Maybe it's a facet I want to touch and take your views because it's rightfully linked with the kind of response what you're giving. Conceptual thinking, great, or rather conceptual learning, great, contextual, good in terms of industry alignment. But there's something today which has become what erstwhile used to be soft skills, today have become hard skills. The whole art of problem solving, in other words, art of problem identification, persuasion, conflict, emotional intelligence. Now, how do students, when there is this whole aspect of personalized learning coming in, this aspect of what we say must have skills, how can they incorporate these assets, I would say aspects as well?
Well, I think, yes, to a certain extent, you can incorporate that into, the experiential learning piece. So automatically, if I am looking at, the skills, if I'm looking at the transferable skills development, I think most of your courses, whether that be certain courses which could be more technical in nature, whether that analytics-based courses, AI-based courses, machine learning-based courses, and even courses like marketing or intellectual property rights. I think how you treat them, right? How the faculty assesses, how the faculty ensures that there's a lot of group learning that is taking place, how faculty, assures, that there is individual learning also happening at the same time. What kind of projects that you're actually doing? How are people managing these projects over a period of time? What's the off-classroom learning that's happening as well? Because I think, for a lot of progressive university like ours, I think it's not about the learning that is taking place in the classroom. It is also about what is happening outside the classroom, which is usually 55–60% of the time. That is also very important to me. How do I, curate that? How do I ensure that, there are certain projects which could be fun, but at the same time are being able to build in that emotionality quotient, are being able to build in that quotient of agility, are being able to build that quotient of adaptability that comes in. Of course, in our case, the students also travel, to Imperial College to bring in that cultural dexterity as well. So I think a lot of these concepts have to be very scientifically designed into the curriculum, and it ideally should be followed to the T, leaving some levels of flexibility. I think that's when you're able to take advantage of experiential learning, and incidentally, experiential learning is done the right way, learning by doing being done the right way, I think is able to build in a lot of the hard and the soft skills that you are actually talking about.
Great. I like the word, what you said, cultural dexterity, because culture can actually make or break an organization, and the talent which comes in seemingly from outside any other, I would say, academic institutions carry a lot of responsibility in terms of being immersive in the culture. So I think that's a great point. I don't want to stop the flow of the question, Vishal, so I'll just pause, take a couple of questions, because I think some of them, while you were kind of narrating, I was just trying to have a glance and thought-provoking, I must say. On the same aspect is about this, you talked about learning. There is often, if I may put, and that's a question, complaint or a rant from the industry, look, when we hire talent, and this is an industry view, the students again need that kind of a training, 3 months, 6 months, and this whole aspect of hire, train, deploy kind of a thing takes a lot of time for an individual to get baked and get into project or engagement. Is there a way, I mean, through these all set of new experiential learning, blended programs, can this be accelerated in terms of maybe truncating the training period, what the organization needs? I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think BMU has some approach. I think you work with some of these organizations. So would you like to take this question, please, Vishal?
So I think, I guess, what you're alluding to is the industry academia linkages.
Correct.
So I think from our perspective, at the
also, sorry, but if you can touch upon this cycle of training once they get deployed in the company takes huge time for training.
Absolutely.
Is there a way to truncate that also, please?
Absolutely. So I think, once again, how closely we work with the industry, also will manifest in how much the industry is going to spend in terms of time as well as other resource on them after they join you. So I think, for a long time, industry and the academic relationship from an Indian perspective has always been looked at as, for placement, right? Or the fact that they will come at a later date to be able to, place the graduates or employ the graduates or select them. And of course, a few guest lectures that, a peppering of those lectures over a period of time. But the fact is that if we learn from a lot of things that are happening in other countries, if I look at the US for that matter, the kind of industry academic relationship that they have, if I look at some data, US spends about 2.7% of their GDP on R&D, right? And of course, they have a very triple helix kind of a model. Wherein the government, the industry, as well as the academia or higher education institutions actually align with each other to be able to do that. There are a lot of projects, there's a lot of investments, there's a lot of top-down, bottom-up, crisscross kind of cooperations that happen, right? You already see the benefit of that many times. Google aligning with, let's say, a University College London in the UK. Some people align with IBM. Data availability exists. If you look at the very interesting research that even has happened now, the other day we were exploring the opportunity to do some research on pollution levels, and how they've kind of come down. And you got some amazing, insight from a lot of research that was done by US companies along with US universities, right? So this whole idea of, you have people on a Florida beach who, if you remember, they were enjoying spring term or whatever else, and they tracked the movement of these people, how they kind of entered the rest of the United States from Miami or wherever else, and how possibility of the infection spreading. So I think very amazing kind of research. And the reason why that could happen was because of the fact that there was a lot of integration between the organization, the ones who were maybe, let's say, mobile data or other companies, telecom companies, along with academics, were working together. So I think the fact is, for us as a country, we're we still don't necessarily have a policy of how industry and academic relationships should be mentored or should be curated, or how they should be going in the longer term. We still have a bit of a catch up. So even China spends more than 2% of their GDP on the R&D, Germany, US, UK, whatever, and we spend about 0.6, which is fine, but it has to keep evolving too much longer, too much more in the longer term. So I think in our own way, we've realized that to be able to crunch on the training costs that's the companies incur when they take the students in, is to get the industry into the university from day one, right? So whether it is core designing of curriculum, whether it is the creation of life projects right from day one of a student's life within the university. Right, the student doesn't have to travel. He's engaging in data. He's engaging in some kind of a training that the company is giving them over a period of time. And it's not just about summer internship. The fact is that this kind of training has to happen right from the beginning. The comfort levels, the levels of intrinsic maturity have to be developed from day one. And I think that's where my argument of, what am I doing with the students, or what are the students doing 60% of the time and they're outside the classroom, also comes in. That's the level. So co-designing of the curriculum, having board of studies which have 50% of industry people coming in, a co-thought of when we are designing new curriculum, new courses. We have to be able to take a lot of guidance from people in the know, from the industry on that. So I think these are all measures that we actually take at the university to ensure that the students are much more ready for the real world. At the same time, the belief is not just about a student's immersion with industry from day one, but it is also about how are the faculty immersing with the industry. That is very important to us, right? Are they actually also doing certain levels of internship? Are they actually doing joint projects? Are they helping in the creation of certain products, right? So for universities like ours, so for Hero Group essentially is, we are all part of the Hero Group, right? So automatically that lends itself to a lot of industry cooperation, not only in the Hero Group, but much beyond as well, wherein faculties are writing along with the industry participants. They're actually going across and understanding the newer dynamics of managing, administering of technology.
If it's designed for any architecture platform, hardware related, then that may cause problem if that architecture.
Vishal, can you please put your questions in the chat window? We'll take that, please.
Sure. So,
sorry, please go ahead.
No problem. So I think, faculty needs to be immersed in industry as much as a student is immersing. And we ensure that as well, wherein faculty right along with industry people, whether it's cases, some levels of faculty internships, some far, longer term product development projects that are happening across the board. Faculty should be involved in that. So I think for industry to come closer, I guess a lot of the research that we do as a university has to be meaningful to them as well, right? Sometimes, the practicality of what we do has to be enhanced to ensure that, both parties are equally interested in creating those partnerships. And I think in our case, we've been, to a certain extent, successful. It's obviously an evolving process and it will carry on.
Great. So I want to switch back, Vishal, to this experiential learning and then revert back to the questions, because there is a steady flow of questions coming and I don't want to miss taking your views on that, please. This thing around what you said about atomization of learning. We also believe today then there are things around coming at some stage, students able to get a flexibility of choosing their electives, their set of kind of programs, what they need to go through, learning on the go in terms of taking some bit-sized courses from the MOOCs or EdTech platforms. What's, in your view, are the new best practices? And to the aspect what I touched upon, how is it feasible in terms of a student getting this whole multidisciplinary learning experience? Because at the end of the day, we are making that, I would say, student more kind of, susceptible and more kind of, let's say, adaptive to the changing world. What are the best practices in your view, which are evolving on the learning side? And what's the future going to be like on this whole aspect about the learning?
Well, I think my firm belief, our firm philosophy is that, I think learning has gone beyond the opening of the tap and then the closing of the tap. But learning is all pervasive. Learning can happen at 12 at night, or learning can happen, at 6 in the morning. The aha moments can actually take place. So I think, for us, we are increasingly integrating tech platforms. We're increasingly integrating blended approaches to learning. We're increasingly integrating asynchronous content. Increasingly integrating and having a lot of trainings of the faculty to do a lot of transition into this kind of space. So I think even after the lockdown is rolled back, I don't see a lot of our model that we've kind of adopted, in a blended approach or the online approach actually changing. We will not be.
That's good what you said. I'm sorry to jump, but that was a question we had from one of the participants, that how BMU has been affected or not affected because of this COVID. So glad you answered that.
Yeah, so I think just to add to that, I think we've been rather effective. For us, it didn't take very long to decide that we have to go online. For us, learning is paramount. For us, the continuity of learning is paramount. So I think, and of course, while we did this, we also monitored, we also mentored, we also had a lot of meetings with all the faculties, trainings, competitions, to ensure that faculty are being able to use this medium in the right kind of manner. Right. I think what we have to remember here is that, many a times the transition of very good faculty as well into this space at times is is a problem, right? Whereas at the same time, you have faculty who may have not necessarily relished very large audiences in a face-to-face kind of environment in classrooms, have actually thrived in this, in this model. For us, yes, we have to ensure that we offer the right levels of engagement. We encourage faculty not necessarily adopt every tool in the book on the online medium. You have to go it slow. You have to create that comfort. But at the same time, I think it also gives us a lot of ideas on what.
If I may, there is also a question coming in. I'm reading that through. So in a way, and a bit provocative, but would love to take your thoughts. Are you saying the days of iconic faculty is over and it's up to the faculties now to create their own aura?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I think every faculty, at least from our context, does realize that there is a change, does realize that there is a certain, modification, certain kind of tweak, certain orientation that is changing. The other day, yesterday, I was listening to a few people from the entertainment industry, and they were talking about how entertainment's going to change post this. How Netflix, you have online concerts now. Obviously, you'll have varied opinions. Some people say, an online concert, come on. We need that environment, we need that atmosphere. But the fact is that what you do, right? This is spurring a lot of new innovative ideas, going forward. So for us, I think one, we have to ensure that everything is going well. For us, it's not just about, okay, we've put everything online and, please do it because we're just doing it for 2-3 months. For us and a lot of progressive universities, you will notice that this will lead to a lot more product development. This will lead to a lot more course development. This will lead to a lot more course enhancement to the kind of courses that are already running in that medium. Because, fundamentally our belief is it's not that the students don't like learning. The fact is that students don't like how they're taught. So the onus is on us also to see how we can actually transition to that. It's, and I'm sure all faculty will be able to. Some will take longer, some will take lesser time. But the fact is that this sphere is important for everyone.
Great. So in that regard, you talked about, and that's a question I'm just trying to link what we have from the audience. There's a great set of technology interventions we have today across. What, in your view, has been the technology investments which have been done by academy at large, and any specific intervention of technology you want to quote what BMU has done at its own end?
So I think for us, and in fact, and this also is a good question for a lot of startup enthusiasts who are wanting to launch, companies in the education sphere. I think a lot of progressive universities have actually started adopting technology across the value chain, across the the system, right from the time of the first interaction that a student has with the university, or a prospective student has with the university as well. So I think a lot of the digital content that is out there that students are reading about the university, whether it is the website resource, whether it's any other digital assets. So automatically, even that space is being automated, or technology infusion is taking place over there. So you have people like Lead Squared, you have people like No Paper Forms, you must have heard of them, who are actually innovating in that area, in that space. At the same time, when you come closer home, you have everybody talks about the learning management system, and everybody tends to use learning management system just as a notice board or as a very active medium. So automatically, even that space is getting getting more turbocharged. You have the Colpols of the world, you have the Junos of the world, you have a lot of these people who are creating a better engagement of the students, with the faculty, with the university at large, amongst themselves, in that space. So there's a lot of disruption that is happening there. At the same time, there's a lot of tech that is being incorporated even in the curriculum, right? Even in the course delivery, which we've been talking about. So whether it is Mentimeter, whether it is many of these ones that are out there, whether it's Padlet. A lot of this is being used for more engagement with the students, a better experience, a better engagement, even at the very basic level. There are faculty who combine a WebEx along with a Google Hangout or a Google Meet. Why are you doing that? Because, the WebEx is there for everybody in one class, technically speaking, and then you want them to break out into smaller rooms, to clusters, to discuss, and you can then observe them, you can then listen into them about their discussions. At the same time, even you go ahead into the further into the space placements. So if you look at companies such as Riculta, you get look at companies such as Superset. A lot of them actually, being a lot of the progressive universities are adopting such technologies to formalize a lot of the placement process going forward. So I think a lot of technology is being adopted across the entire value chain of something that is rather experiential, right? So we've always thought that operational surgery as well as education are very experiential, which at times how much of it can you actually technologify, if I can use that term, but you can do it. Yes, and some of the progressive universities are doing that, including ours.
Great. This is a future forward question, Vishal, but very, very topical in terms of the whole theme what we have. And I'll just take verbatim how it's coming. What's the new playbook of experiential learning you talked about? And this is on the parameters of pedagogy, delivery, content, faculty. And if that playbook needs to be kind of written by you, and that's the question, how it will look like in 2030. So you'll have to take a 10-year punt. But it's very topical what you said, and I'm sure participants are enjoying and would love to take a future forward view of this.
So I think, more and more, we as universities have to be able to transition not only ourselves, but also the students into zones which are more around living a life rather than making a living. So, quite frankly, students of the future students who want to pass out now will have so many jobs that they might have, will have so many different companies that they will work for, different roles. Remember, micro-credentialing is another big thing, this whole idea of just-in-time learning, right? Am I being, too confident and say that, no, whatever I'm able to build into the student is what the student will utilize throughout his life? Not necessarily, right? This whole idea of continuing education, this whole idea of universities reflecting all ages rather than very young students will become a reality, right? And I think for us, what we can basically focus on right now, I don't want to, look at how a 2030 window might look like. But I think the fact is, if I create those fundamentals, the fundamentals of ability to solve problems, ability to critically analyze things, the ability to make decisions under all sorts of contexts and circumstances, the ability to appreciate technology and also be able to go beyond appreciation, understand technology, implications of technology, implications of coding, software. If I'm able to make them understand, the implications of the decisions they make going forward, right? So the decisions that they make in terms of human beings, decisions that they make in terms of the haves and the have-nots, make them, stronger intrinsically as human beings, right? The interesting bit nowadays is that you have 5,000 friends on Facebook, but sometimes you're not able to manage one relationship, right? So fundamentally speaking, how do you improve the intrinsic capability of the person? How do you make sure he or she is able to manage relationships, circumstances, contexts, crises? This is what a university should be focusing on. And if you focus on that, I think 2030, 2040, 2050, bring it on. I don't know whether I'll be there by then, but there's always hope.
Wonderful, wonderful. I like the word what you give, this analogy that you may have 5,000 friends on Facebook. Can you manage one relationship? Great. On that context, Vishal, there's one more question, and this was something which came in as part of your earlier narrative, entrepreneurship. As academic institutions, we still not geared up, and that's something which is coming out. I mean, there is a different DNA for an entrepreneur. I mean, and many of the students, as you're aware, are joining straight out of college, jumping into this, either joining small startups or kind of running ventures of their own. What's your view in terms of this whole piece around education for entrepreneurship?
Well, I think very important, quite very important. I think not only be driven by the scenario or driven by automation or even otherwise. I think the incubation centers, the institutes of innovation entrepreneurship within universities, and incidentally, we have one as well, which is quite forward thinking. These will become highly relevant, right? So far, you would notice when you go to a lot of these startup contests, you do notice, for example, a tech student at times has some good understanding of the tech, but may not have a good understanding of the market, may not have a good understanding of the business, may not have a good understanding of how will you make money. Right? I think universities, it's important for them to be able to create that kind of environment. At the same time, the management guys might have a good idea of selling, but is your core technology good enough? Right? So I think a lot of these things will have to change. The mentoring programs will have to become more formalized. Even there, I think a lot of industry can help us do better. You have startups, you have startup founders, you have venture capitalists, you have private equity players, you have the big guys, you have people who made it a success in life, in startups. These people have to be engaged much more than just maybe a 1 hour, 2 hour session, come along. They have to come in and work along with the students over a period of time. Because remember, I think, and this is something that I've said before, entrepreneurs, there's some research, I don't know whether it's true or not, out there which suggests that entrepreneurs sometimes have a certain, a variation in their genes, right, which is more risk-taking. Right, I forget what the the term is. I think it's ABOLOM or whatever. The fact is that this particular risk-taking gene or aggressor gene is also found in people who we at times find in prisons. Right. So there's some research on that. How do you then ensure that if somebody had the willingness to do a startup, how is that person mentored? How is that person shaped up? How is that person given the right levels of skills?
Nice. Yeah.
That will become very, very important, right? Driven by the environment, driven by the circumstances, and driven by a maturing of the entrepreneurial ecosystem as well going forward. I think, quite frankly, universities have to start paying much more attention to this. I think the government is also thinking of that. MHRD is doing that. AICT, if you notice in the last few, 1 or 2 years, a lot of focus has gone into, that. But I think a more concerted effort is also required from our side to be able to do it as well. So I think this will become very important.
Great. So on that particular link, Vishal, there's a question around specifically about BMU. What are the kind of programs you have today and those learning pedagogies, which is in sync with the changing market and the VUCA world?
Well, for us, if I look at, let's say, for example, the management programs. The management programs, we not only have the regular MBA programs, so the marketing, finance, HR, operations, but we also have an MBA in analytics. We have an MBA in finance and investment banking. At the same time, we also have the facility to provide students knowledge and courses on forensic and fraud accounting, right? Things which many consulting firms are also moving towards. We also have launched recently the MBA in AI and data engineering, which is artificial intelligence and data engineering. And the reason why we've done that is exactly that. If you yes, you can do an MBA in analytics, which is absolutely fine. But at the same time, you also need managers of the future or leaders of the future to optimize well, to integrate technologies into organizations, to ensure that there's a certain level of equilibrium that happens. It's not just about the automation, and forget everything else. It's also about the human factor. It's also about the sustainability. A lot of these questions, are important going forward. But more importantly, I think irrespective of whether it is our management curriculum, whether it's our undergraduate management curriculum, even there we have a lot of atomization. So business analytics, digital entrepreneurship, and all that. Spaces as well in the School of Engineering and Technology. We have the ability to learn cybersecurity apart from your regular programs. You have the ability to learn robotics apart from your regular program. So I think the philosophy across the university for us is one. We have to leave flexibility for the student to decide his or her path. Of course, advised, mentored over a period on what is best, what is not. But you have to allow the student a certain choice, right? The flexibility of the curriculum. So we do that. The other is we want to ensure that students have a certain quantitative and qualitative appreciation of knowledge as well. So even our marketing students, for example, will have the option and will be doing analytics-based courses. Everybody learns R and Python, right? So I think that's where the whole thing is, the flexibility, the ability to do things that you would like to do, to explore, then come to firm decisions, appreciate the tech space as well, pick up on the implications of the coding, pick up on the implications of programming and software. Of course, learn your domain knowledge, but at the same time, you should also be appreciative of civilization. You should also be appreciative of where we're coming from and where we're going. You also have to be appreciative of economic history, for that matter, right? Whatever is happening now could have a link in the past with a few things, and it's important that we become deeper thinkers because of that. So I think that's the predominant flavor across our curriculum within all the schools.
Great. And I can vouch, coming from the industry, you talked about MBA and AI and data engineering. Not many institutes are thinking in that direction, because data engineering is the biggest pivot which has happened in AI, because you can't build algorithms if you don't have strong data pipes. So glad to know that. Vishal, we have time for one question, and it's relevant, and maybe this is one facet we haven't touched. So I'll talk about that from a question and take your views, please. This academic consortia, AICT and other regulatory bodies, how open are they in terms of looking at these whole changes in the education? The new age institutions we talk about, but what's been your experience? And if there are some kind of recommendations you would like to put across, I'd like to take your views, please.
So I think over a period of time, even the regulatory setups and the systems have started appreciating a lot of the change. If you read around the interviews of people who are in charge of, let's say, the ICTE or the UGC, you would definitely read between the lines and realize that, of course, I think things have changed. It's not just about the input, all right? It's not just anymore about how big are our classrooms. It's not just about how many labs we have, but I think it's a lot to do with the outcome. So you do see that transition happening, right? But the fact is that a lot more would be required, right? One of the bigger things is that how do you manage this whole online spurt at the moment, right? How does the regulatory body look at a lot of the change that is happening because of the conditions that we see around, especially related to online learning, especially related to online technology, especially related to a situation wherein for-profit enterprises or corporate training setups or whatever else are now head-on in a way with higher education institutions, because both have kind of gone into each other's space, right? So I think the new education policy, whenever adopted, is definitely a good step forward, in terms of the way they view higher education institutions, teaching-based institutions, research-based institutions, mixed institutions, whatever. But I think this is one piece about how do you manage blended learning? How do you manage, or, enterprises? Who does the blended learning? How you're able to do it? The geographic locations of where you're able to deliver this. A lot of this will have to be thought about, going forward. Because I think so far, many times, and especially with newer universities, newer progressive universities, some of the things about what these universities are able to do are obviously linked to certain outcomes. Obviously linked to certain outcomes such as NAC or certain accreditations, and post that you're able to do this. So I think post that you're able to then maybe offer something else. So I think a lot of this will require going back to the drawing board, and I'm sure the regulatory bodies are looking at this right now, especially this whole thing around work from home, this whole thing around whether this whole idea which people may have laughed at is this whole concept of 250 million schools for 250 million students. Right? This whole idea that you can actually sit wherever you are and learn, right? That seems to have become a little bit more mainstream now. Right? And if it's become mainstream, and it's not just within the realms of distance learning programs anymore, right? What do you do with that? I think a lot of those things will have to be understood going forward, and I'm sure the regulatory bodies I'm sure are currently looking at this right now. How do you go forward in these scenarios?
Sure. We would have loved to continue. Unfortunately, we've hit top of the hour while we still have questions. But Vishal, this is thought-provoking, engrossing, and really engaging session. I'm sure the participants, and I was looking at the steady flow of questions, you touched upon, I think, a whole facet of dimensions, not only around the new age learning institutions, but also about experiential learning, and also almost gave us a whole playbook, not only for today, but 20, 30, and 40 as well. And that's something which I think for the participants would be a great set of learning, because it's right, as rightfully you said, it's about atomization of learning, and it's not just conceptual, contextual. There's a whole aspect about living, the whole aspect of what I say, are you really kind of becoming good for yourself in terms of becoming a leader or a professional? So I think the perspectives were really kind of holistic, whole spectrum I think we covered, and thanks so much for those engaging thoughts and all. I think it's wonderful to see an academic leader having a blend of academics and corporate, which is a rare combination, I must say. But thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you being there on this session. Thank you so much. Thanks for all.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all the participants there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Vishal. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.